in attending this session of Islamic knowledge, because having the sincere intention is a requirement to get the reward. So the Muslim, whenever he does a good deed, he has to have the sincere intention for the sake of Allah to get reward for that good deed. The reward is defined as the compensation that the Muslim receives in the hereafter for the good deeds that he did in this life among what makes him happy. An example of the reward that is guaranteed to the righteous Muslim in the grave is that his grave is expanded approximately 105 feet by 105 feet, and his grave is illuminated with a light similar to the light of a full moon, and the fragrance of paradise will be present in the grave. The sincere intention means for the Muslim to do the good deed, seeking the acceptance of Allah only, and not the praise of the people. So alhamdulillah, we're grateful to Allah that He has guided us to the straight path, as-sirat al-mustaqim, which is referring to al-Islam. So we are grateful to Allah that He has guided us to al-Islam, that He has made our hearts open to accepting al-Islam, and that we have the correct belief in our heart, the unshakable, firm belief in Allah and His Messenger. So this is the greatest endowment. This is the greatest blessing that the Muslim can have. The greatest blessing that the human can have. Because with al-Islam, you have everything, and without Islam, the person has nothing. With Islam, the person makes it into paradise. Without al-Islam, the person goes to hellfire. So we're going to continue on, inshallah, with section 10. Now the author is going to mention additional conditions for the prayer. So he mentions, among the conditions of the prayer is purification from major ritual impurity, also known as al-hadath al-akbar in Arabic, by performing the obligatory whole body wash, ghusl. So basically when we say in English, obligatory bath, obligatory full body wash, it's referring to this specific washing that is done to remove the major ritual impurity. The major ritual impurity, al-hadath al-akbar, is a state of impurity, a religious state of impurity that is caused by certain things. So we're going to mention these things now. Also, or tayammum, when one is unable to perform the obligatory wash. So in order for the Muslim to remove the state of major ritual impurity, he has to make a full body wash, ghusl, or if he doesn't have water, or if he can't use water, he makes tayammum when he is unable to perform the full body wash. So there are 5 occurrences which render the whole body wash, ghusl, an obligation. So these 5 things, if they occur, if they happen, now the Muslim, after that thing happens, he has to make a full body wash in order to lift the state of major ritual impurity. The first is the emission of mani. The emission of mani, it means the exiting of mani, for the mani to come out. And what is the mani? The mani is a liquid that exists in both males and females, that it is the reproductive fluid, meaning that this liquid, when it's mixed together with the male and the female, and it becomes settled in the woman's womb, in her uterus, then this is how pregnancy occurs. So this liquid, in the Arabic language, is referred to as mani. And in English, the word for it, for the male, is semen. And there's no, I've never found a word for it that's specific to women, but both men and women, they have this fluid, the mani. So if that mani comes out, however it comes out, whichever way it comes out, then this person now has to make a ghusl, has to make an obligatory full body wash. The second occurrence, or the second thing, is sexual intercourse, which is Islamically defined as inserting the head of the penis into a vagina, or what in Arabic is known as farj. And the Arabic word farj, it applies to both the vagina and to the anus. So if someone inserts the head of their penis into a vagina or into an anus, they are obligated to make ghusl. And so that is the minimum that would be required. If they don't insert the whole entire head of the penis, or just one part of it, and not the whole entire part of the head, then the ghusl is not an obligation. And for the person that, for some reason, doesn't have a penis head, if they insert the amount that is proportionate to the penis head of what they have, so that would obligate the ghusl as well. The third thing is menses. So if the woman, she gets her period, and then once the period ends, by the period ending, she has to make a ghusl so that she can be able to pray and fast, etc. So that she can be able to pray, not fast. So she can be able to pray and make tawaf and circle around the Kaaba. The woman, she can pray. She can fast. The woman can fast before she makes ghusl. After her period is over, she can fast before she makes ghusl. The fourth thing is postpartum bleeding. So the postpartum bleeding is something that occurs to the woman usually after she gives birth. She begins to bleed. It usually lasts for about 40 days, and the maximum that it could be is 60 days. And the least amount that it could be is 1 moment. So she bleeds for a moment after giving birth, and then she stops bleeding. She doesn't bleed again after that. Then this is considered that her postpartum bleeding ended. The fifth thing is childbirth. So again, specific to the woman, if she gives birth and then she doesn't bleed afterwards, but she gave birth through the natural way, then she's obligated to make ghusl. So those are the 5 things that are mentioned here that make ghusl an obligation. And now we're going to mention the integrals of the obligatory whole body wash. So there are only 2. The integrals of the obligatory whole body wash are 2. The first is the intention to remove the major ritual impurity, al-hadathul akbar, or the like. That it means that the person has to have in their heart that intention, that they're washing their entire body because they are removing the major ritual impurity, for example. So that's what they would have in their heart. I am now making the obligatory ghusl to remove the major ritual impurity, or I'm now making the obligatory ghusl. This is the intention that has to be present in the heart. And the second integral is to wash the entire body with water, with purifying water. That is the skin and hair, even if the hair was thick. So here, for the ghusl, if the person has thick hair on their head, or they have thick hair on their chest or on their back, or they have thick hair on their arms, or they have thick hair on their legs or on their face, they have to make sure that the body reaches all the hair and all the skin. So it's not like wudu, when the man has a thick beard, he doesn't have to make sure that the water reaches. No, for the ghusl, he has to make sure, the person has to make sure that even if they have thick hair all over their body, they have to wash, they have to make sure that the water reaches the skin. So when we say the whole body, we were referring to the apparent part of the body. So, for example, the inside of the nose is not included. The inside of the mouth is not included. Into the ear canal is not included. So what the person has to wash is the apparent part of their body. But it's better to make sure that the person, let's say, gets water in their nose and in their mouth, because there's some imams that say they have to wash the nose and the mouth. So to exit from that difference of opinion and to be in compliance with all the imams, then it's better to do that. But in the Shafi'i school, radiyallahu anhu, you only have to wash the apparent part of the body. So that includes if the person has rolls of skin, they have to make sure that they get in between the crevices of their body. They have to make sure they get, for example, that they wash in between their buttocks. For example, that they make the water reach their anus, for example. If the man is uncircumcised, he has to make sure that he peels back the foreskin. Also, he has to make sure that the water, for example, reaches every part of the private part. And for the woman as well, she has to make sure that the water reaches her private part. And if there's anything on the skin that prevents the water from reaching the skin, that has to be removed. Also, if the person has a hole on their earlobe because of a piercing, they have to make sure that, for example, they just squeeze that spot so that the water gets in between that skin that they have. If they don't have the piercing in, it'll be like sealed. They just have to squeeze that part to make sure that the water gets in. Yeah, that naturally happens just by like rubbing and things like that. So any questions about that before we move on to the conditions of a valid purification? Just let us know in the chat. طيب. So now we're going to the new section, section 11. The conditions of valid purification are Islam. Yani, for any purification that's done in Islam, like ritual impurity, minor ritual impurity, or major ritual impurity, to remove that impurity, the person has to be Muslim. So if the person is not Muslim, they won't have a valid wudu. If a person is not Muslim, they won't have a valid ghusl. If the person is not Muslim, they won't have a valid tayammum. So in order for these things to be valid, the person has to be Muslim, because the act of worship is not valid without Islam. And the person, in order for their act of worship, their ibadah, to be valid, they have to be Muslim. And so the wudu and the ghusl, they are acts of worship, so the person has to be Muslim. The second is at-tamyiz, which is referring to the capacity to reason and discern. Discern, yani, means to distinguish. Yes, inshallah, I can send a copy of this. I will see if I can send it in the chat, inshallah, after. Let me see if I can do it now. Okay, yes. I can send it here on the chat. All right. There it is. I sent it there. And the recording, inshallah, is will be uploaded to YouTube. So the tamyiz, the capacity to reason and discern. So this usually occurs around the age of 7 lunar years. But it's possible that it could occur at 6 lunar years. It's possible that it could occur at 5 lunar years if the child is very sharp. So how do we tell if the child has reached that stage? It's very easy, very simple. By asking them questions. When you ask them questions and they respond to those questions based on understanding, and based on the fact that they understand what you're asking and they reply based on that understanding, then this is called tamyiz. And we covered that in the previous class. For example, if you ask the child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say they want to be a doctor. Then you ask them, well, why do you want to be a doctor? And they say, because I want to heal people, I want to help people, I want to cure sickness. So then that means they're understanding what you're asking them and they're replying based on an understanding. And this means that they reach to the capacity to reason and discern. But if you were to ask the child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then they say pancakes, ice cream, then you know that they're not understanding what you're saying. So you know that they haven't reached tamyiz. So in order for a child to be able to make wudu, for their wudu to be valid, they have to have tamyiz. If they don't have it, then they can't make wudu. In order for the ghusl to be valid of the child, they need to have tamyiz. If they don't have it, then they can't make ghusl. If the child doesn't have tamyiz, then he can't pray. And so, for example, when you see like a toddler and he sees adults praying and he stands next to them and he lifts his hands up to his head and then he pretends that he is going down to sujood, etc. This is not permissible to let the child do that. So if we witness that as adults, we have to pull the child aside and say, hey, this is, you want to watch how the Muslims pray, come and watch how the Muslims pray, etc. So we don't, for example, encourage them to do that or allow them to do that. The third condition is the absence of anything which prevents the water from reaching the part that must be washed. So that means that if there is something on the skin that causes a physical barrier that prevents the water from touching that part, that thing, that substance that's on the skin has to be removed. So for example, if the person had paint, right? Some paint on their skin, that causes a physical barrier. So they have to remove that paint off of their body before they make ghusl or before they make wudu. Ink, for example, like the ink of a pen or like a marker, somebody draws on themselves with a marker, this does not prevent the water from reaching the skin. This is just a coloring of the skin. And if the person writes on themselves with a pen or with a marker, this would not prevent the water from reaching the skin. So the person wouldn't have to wash off the ink or the marker from their skin in order for their ghusl or wudu to be valid. But anything else that causes a barrier, like nail polish, paint, for example, if somebody had some crazy glue on their hand, they have to remove it. They have to make sure to take it off. If the woman is wearing, let's say, what they call waterproof makeup, she has to remove it before she makes wudu or she makes ghusl. Then the next thing is for water to flow on the part that must be washed. So that means that it's not enough to just wet the hand and to rub the wet hand on the part that you need to wash. There has to be at least some flowing of the water. So there has to be like some quantity of the water there. So even if it's a little bit, for example, someone that takes some droplets of water and they drop the droplets on their hand or on the part that needs to be washed, and then they rub it, then this is called washing. That is enough. So it doesn't have to be like a waterfall of water on the part in order for it to be considered to be washed. It can be droplets of water. So even if, for example, the person had a dropper, or they had, for example, let's say, a wet cloth, and then they squeezed the wet cloth, and then some of the water dropped onto the part. The person just has to rub that water all over the area that they need to wash, and that would be enough. But what's not enough is just only wetting the hand. So having like wetness, moisture on the hand, and then rubbing that on the part, this is not enough, because that's not called flowing. The water would not be considered that is flowing. The next thing is to use purifying water. So this is a specific type of water that's called purifying water. And so what does it mean? What does it mean, purifying water? Water not stripped of its name as a result of being mixed with a pure substance from which the water can be easily shielded. So let's say you have a glass of water on the counter. It's easy to keep that water free from, let's say, milk or tea, right? There's not going to be like something in that area that makes it so that milk or tea or ink, let's say, falls into the water without you being able to shield it, without you being able to stop it from going in. So basically, if it's easy, if the pure thing that goes inside of the water, if it's easy to prevent that thing from going into the water, and then that thing goes in and it mixes together with the water to the point where it's not called water anymore, then you cannot use that water for purification. So that's what it means when we say purifying water. And it means absolute water. It means water that you can truthfully call it water without any other adjective. So let's give a practical example. If someone has a bucket of water, and somehow, let's say, some ink falls into that water, and now the water, it becomes changed by the ink to the point where if someone asked you, what is that? And if you said water, it would not be true. That's the definition that the scholars of Islamic law, they gave. So if, let's say, only a little bit of ink falls into the water and the water does not change, then what does that mean? That means that if someone asks you, what is that in the bucket? And you said water, it would be true. So anything pure that mixes with the water, and it mixes with the water to the point where now you cannot call this water anymore because it changed. So now you would not be able to use that water to make wudu, or to make ghusl, or to clean, let's say, a spot that was contaminated with filth. So if the amount of pure substance that went into the water was only a little bit and it didn't change the water, you can still use it. So let's say you had the bucket of water, and let's say one drop of milk fell into the bucket of water. That one drop of milk is not going to change the water, so you can still use it. And all of that is with the condition that the water can be easily shielded from that pure substance. Then the author said the water used for purification must not have changed by najas filth, even if it was a slight change. Now, when it comes to najas filth, like let's say a drop of urine, if a drop of urine falls into, let's say, one bucket of water, even though that drop of urine did not change the water in its color or taste or smell, but still, because it's najas filth, and it touched that water, and that water is a small amount of water, then automatically that water becomes filthy. That's why the author said, if the water was less than 2 qullas, it is a condition that it does not come in contact with najas filth that is not exempted. And 2 qullas is a measure of volume that is about 190 liters of water. So if the water is 10 liters or 20 liters or 100 liters, and some unexempted filth falls into it, even if it's one drop, all of that water becomes filthy. Now, if the amount of water is a lot, like if it was more than 2 qullas, then this is not affected by just some najis filth touching the water. So if you have, let's say 200 liters of water, if we have 250 liters of water, 300 liters of water, and one drop of urine falls into that water, it doesn't change the water. So like if you're in a river, or you're in a lake, or you're in the ocean, and let's say someone urinates in there, that water is still considered to be purifying because it's a large amount, and that filth did not change the water. So as long as the water is a large amount, approximately 190 liters or more, and the water isn't changed by coming into contact with najas filth, then that water is still pure. So the difference between the small amount of water and the large amount of water is that with the small amount of water, if it comes into contact with an unexempted najas filth, it doesn't matter if the water is changed or not, it's automatically judged as filthy. And with the large amount of water, if it's touched by unexempted najas filth, then here we check, did the water change because of the filth? If the answer is yes, then that water cannot be used for purification. If the water did not change, if the large amount of water did not change because of the filth, then you can still use it for purification. Now, what's an example of a pure substance that the water can be easily shielded from? Let's say that there is a river, and that river has, let's say, red soil. That river has red soil. So the red soil mixed together with the river water to the point that the water appears to be brown. So the soil is a pure substance. It mixed together with the water, and it's brown. But since that soil, it's not easy to protect the water from that soil, then even though the water changed because of it being mixed with that soil, it can still be used for purification. Same thing if, for example, it's a lake or a pond, and the pond or the lake has like algae, or there were some leaves that fell in it, and those leaves, they dissolve, and so the color of the leaves changed the water and into that color. You can still use it because it's difficult to protect the water from those natural things. Also, if, let's say, the water is flowing through a channel or an area in the ground, and that area has sulfur, which is a mineral that has like a really a bad smell, smells like rotten eggs, sulfur. And so because the water is flowing through that area, it got some of that smell of the rotten egg smell from the sulfur. So since it's not easy to protect the water from that, you can still use that water for purification. Any questions about that before we move on to the next case? So in order for a purifying water, to be judged as purifying water, it's a condition that this water has not been used to remove major or minor ritual impurity, hadath, or najas filth. So let's say that the person, they made wudu, and the water that fell off of their body parts when they were making wudu, they collected that water. So when they washed themselves the first time, the water dripped off their face, and they collected it in a cup. That water that they collected in the cup, they cannot reuse it to make wudu or to make ghusl, or to clean a spot that has been contaminated with filth. They can use that water for something else, to give it to the animals, to water their crops, to wash the dishes, to cook even, but they cannot use it to make wudu or ghusl or to remove najas filth. So what happens when the person, they cannot find water, or they would be harmed by using the water? They make tayammum. What is tayammum? It is a dry purification. That means that the person, when they are not able to use water, or when they don't have water, then what do they do if they want to pray and they want to make tawaf, etc.? So in this case, they make tayammum. So we're going to talk about how that is done. The person who cannot find water or is harmed by water makes tayammum after the time of what the person is performing tayammum for has set in, and the non-exempted najas filth has been removed. So there's two things that the person has to make sure that they happen first before they make the tayammum. Number one is that, let's say they want to pray dhuhr, so they wait until the dhuhr time is in and then they make tayammum. And the second thing is, if they have any non-exempted filth on their body, they have to make sure that they take that non-exempted filth off. So the person might ask, how could the person remove the unexempted filth off their body if they don't have water? Let's say the person is in the desert and he doesn't have water. He doesn't have water to drink. He doesn't have water for anything. He doesn't have one drop of water, and there's no water around, and he already looked for the water in the specific area. And so what does he do? And he has some unexempted filth on his hand or on his body. What does he do? There's two ways to go about this. Either he lightens that filth, like he takes like a cloth or something, and he rubs it off and takes off as much of the filth as he can. Or in that case, what does he do? He just prays as he is without making tayammum. And after he is able to find water, then he makes up that prayer. So in the first scenario, he lightens the amount of filth that is on his body with like a cloth or something. He cleans it off as much as he can, and then he makes tayammum. And then the second scenario is, since he can't remove the filth off of his body, he doesn't have a way to remove it, then he just prays as he is without making tayammum. And then afterwards, when he finds water and he's able to remove the filth, then he makes the wudu or the ghusl, and then he makes up that prayer. So that second case is called faqidu tahurayn, the one who doesn't have either water or the ability to make tayammum. Now, so we talked about the person who cannot find water, which is like the person stranded in the desert. What about the person who's harmed by water? What does it mean, harmed by water? And it means that the person has water there, it's physically present, but because of a sickness or because of something, a certain situation, if they use the water, let's say, they die. So the person, they have water, but if they use it, they're going to die. So, and that means that they can't use the water. Or the person, for example, if they use the water, then they're going to lose the function of an organ. Like their hand will become paralyzed, or their face will become disfigured, for example. Or if by using the water, it will cause physical harm. Yes, if they have burns, for example, if they have burns, they can't use water because it's going to mess up, it's going to cause a disfigurement on that body part. So these are the situations where if a person has water, he can't use it because of a sickness. So let's say also he has some sort of sickness. If he uses water, then he'll stay sick longer. So in this case, he doesn't use the water, he makes tayammum. So now we're going to talk about how tayammum is performed. So how is it done? Tayammum is performed by wiping one's face and hands, including forearms, with the dust of unmixed, purifying, and dusty soil in the aforementioned order in 2 strikes, with the intention of making the performance of the obligatory prayer permissible while transferring the dust of the soil and wiping the first part of the face. So that's the process. Basically, first the soil has to qualify to be used for tayammum. So for example, it has to be pure soil. So that means it can't be soil that's mixed with filth. It has to be unmixed, so it can't be soil that has, let's say, ash in it or other debris. It has to just be soil, and the soil has to be dusty. So if the soil doesn't have any dust in the Shafi'i school, it won't be valid. So basically, the soil has to have dust. And that's the case in the Shafi'i school. If the soil does not have dust, then it cannot be used for tayammum in the Shafi'i school. And also has to be natural soil. So it cannot be like some soil that is treated or cooked or other ingredients are added to it. And so once you have that soil that is unmixed and it's pure and it's dusty, then what do? You take your palms and you hit the soil, right, with both palms. You hit it one time. And then when you're lifting your hands up to your face after you tap the soil, so you have your palms, you touch your palms to the soil. Then while you're lifting up your hands so that you can rub your face with the soil or with the dust that's from the soil, while you are lifting your hands, you have the intention that you're doing tayammum so that you can pray, that you're doing this tayammum so that you can be able to pray, for example. That's an example of the intention. And so you keep that intention while transferring the dust of the soil or the soil to the face until you touch your face. And then you wipe the face the same way that you do for wudu. So when that happens, then that would be how the tayammum is done. So you do that, you wipe the face, and then you tap the soil a second time, and then you rub your arms, including the elbows, just like in wudu, and then one time. You only have to do it one time. But if you want to pat the soil another time so you can get more soil, that's fine. But the minimum amount of times that you have to pat the soil is twice. So hypothetically, if we could imagine someone pats the soil once with their palms, and they're able to, with one hand, with one palm, wipe the whole entire face, and then with another palm, wipe both hands, then if they were able to do that, that would not be enough. They have to still pat the soil a second time. And they can pat the soil as many times after that as they need, but the minimum amount is twice. So is the process clear for tayammum? Because there's another case related to tayammum that we need to clarify, which is looking for the water. So basically, when there is, in the case of the person, oh yes, you have a question? Yes. Okay, alhamdulillah. No, it's clear. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So let's say the person, he is stranded in the desert. He's in a place where he doesn't know anywhere in that place where there's water. For him, it's possible that there is water there, and it's possible that there's not water there. He's never been to that place. He doesn't know if there is water or not in that area. So in that case, what does the person have to do? He has to look for the water. So what does that mean? He has to look for the water. it means that he has to cover a certain distance of looking for the water before he can make tayammum. Before he can make tayammum. So what is that distance? That distance is called the distance of qurb. The distance of qurb. The distance of qurb is approximately 5,430 feet. So this is, and when does he have to look for this amount of distance? Actually, I need to review that, subhanAllah. And in the next class, I'll mention when he has to look that distance. And then there's another distance where he has to look that is called the ghawth distance, which is shorter. So this ghawth distance is approximately 543 feet. So there's a certain scenario where he only has to look in that distance. And then there's another scenario where he has to look beyond that distance in the area that he's in. I need to double check when that scenario applies. For sure, I know if he knows that somehow he knows that there's water in that area, he has to look for that water in the qurb distance. I'm sorry, in the qurb distance, which is approximately 5,430 feet. So he has to look in all directions for that distance. And the way that he would do it, if he's in a flat land, he just looks around him. He just does a 360-degree scan of the area if he's in the flat land. If he's not in the flat land, then he goes to a vantage point, like a hill or something like that, where he can have the 360 scan, where he can do that. He doesn't have to physically cover that distance in each direction, because that would take a long time and the prayer time would be out by then, most likely. So basically, he just has to, if he's in a flat land, he looks around. If he is in a land that has hills and valleys, etc., he just goes to a vantage point where he can see the 360 scan, and that would be enough. That's for the qurb. So for sure, in the scenario where he knows that there's water in that place, he has to look for the qurb distance. He has to look for the water within the qurb distance. If he doesn't know if there's water in that area or not, he looks the ghawth distance, which is shorter. And it's a distance that the person, if he were with people, that they would be able to hear him if he calls out to them. So if he yells and says, "Hey," and the distance where they would be able to hear him, that's the only distance he has to search. When he doesn't know if there's water there or not. When he's sure that there's no water, when he knows that area, he knows there's no water, then in that case, what does he do? He just makes the tayammum. He doesn't have to look for it. And hopefully that clarifies. Alhamdulillah. طيب. So now moving on to this next section. What are the things that are forbidden to do if the person is not on wudu? If the person, they broke their wudu, there's certain things that they're not allowed to do. Number one is perform the prayer. So any prayer, whether it's an obligation, whether it's sunnah, the person is not allowed to perform that prayer if they're not on wudu. The second is to circle the Kaaba, to make tawaf. The person has to be on wudu to make tawaf. Also, to carry or touch the Quran. So if the person is not on wudu, then they have to make wudu before they can touch the Quran, even with like a finger touching it, or carrying it. So they can't like carry it in their hand or carry it, let's say, in a plastic bag if they don't have wudu. However, the mumayyiz child who does not have ablution is permitted to carry and touch the book of God for the purpose of studying. So there's an exception to this rule, which is the prepubescent Muslim, who the prepubescent child who is mumayyiz, who does have the capacity to reason and discern. So that child, even if they're not on wudu, they're allowed to touch and carry the Quran for the purpose of studying. So it has to be only for that purpose. So if you want your child, let's say, to memorize the Quran and they're not on wudu, you don't make them go and make wudu. You basically tell them that they can study the Quran without being on wudu. Because if you tell them you have to make wudu before you recite Quran, it might demotivate them. Before you memorize Quran or you touch the Quran or you carry the Quran, it might demotivate them because the prepubescent children, they often break their wudu. Now, if it was for other than the purpose of studying, it is not allowed to let the child touch or carry the book of the Quran without wudu. So if they're mumayyiz and you want them to bring you the Quran so that you can read it, so that you can carry it, and they're not on wudu, it's not permissible to tell them, hey, go grab me the mushaf, the Quran off the shelf and bring it to me. Unless they're on wudu. So they have to be on wudu in order for them to, let's say, take it off the shelf to bring it to you. So those are the, if you want to say 5 things that is not permissible to do if you're not on wudu. I'm sorry, 4 things. Doing the prayer, making tawaf, carrying the Quran, or touching the Quran. Now, what is considered Quran in this case? The book of the Quran, what is considered like that? Anything that has the Quran written on it for the purpose of recitation. So let's say you have just one page of the Quran and you don't have wudu, you're not allowed to carry that page or touch that page. If you have, let's say, like something that it has Quran written on it for recitation, then you can't touch it or carry it unless you have wudu. Now, if the thing that has Quran written on it, it's not for the purpose of recitation, for example, like a decoration, someone has like a beautiful like poster that has, for example, Ayatul Kursi written in nice calligraphy, you can touch it and you can carry it without being on wudu. If the person has, let's say, like some verses of the Quran written for protection from the jinn or from sorcery or from the evil eye, and the person wears those verses of the Quran, like they put it in a little pouch and then they wear it around their neck, this is permissible even if the person is not on wudu. So even though it has verses of the Quran, like the beautiful decoration that people put on their walls, even though it's Ayatul Kursi or a Fatiha or something like that, because it's made for decoration, you can touch it and you can carry it even if you don't have wudu. And the one that's made for protection from the evil eye and sorcery, etc., then it's permissible to touch it and carry it even if the person is not on wudu. And also, let's say if the person is transporting a mushaf, a Quran, in their luggage, so they have like their clothes and they have like, their laptop and stuff inside of a suitcase, and they have a Quran inside of it, they can still, even if they're not on wudu, they can still carry that suitcase, even if they're not on wudu, and with the intention that they're carrying the stuff that's inside the suitcase. not with the intention that they're carrying the mushaf, not that they're specifically intending that they're carrying the Quran, and they're just carrying their suitcase. So if it's in their luggage or in their belongings, and there's other things in it besides the Quran, they're allowed to carry it without wudu. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. And in the next class, inshallah, we'll talk about what is unlawful for the junub to do. Basically, it's everything that we mentioned so far, those 4 things. And on top of that, to recite the Quran, yani audibly, meaning to, even if you're not touching it or carrying it, but to recite the Quran, reciting what's specifically in the arrangement of the Quran for the purpose of recitation, then this is forbidden while the person is junub. And while the person is in a state of major ritual impurity from intercourse or the emission of mani. Also to stay in a mosque. So we're going to talk about the details of a masjid. It has to be waqf. It has to be Islamically with the judgment of a masjid. And inshallah, we'll talk those details in the next class. Are there any questions about anything that we mentioned so far? طيب, inshallah, we'll continue next week. We ask Allah Ta'ala to relieve the calamities of the Muslims worldwide. We ask Allah Ta'ala to grant victory and patience to the oppressed Muslims. We ask Allah Ta'ala to heal the wounded and the sick Muslims. We ask Allah Ta'ala to grant the Muslim nation patience and victory. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to make our final words, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There's one question that came in. It says, how do we pack the Quran in a suitcase? Basically, you pack it in with the belongings, as long as none of the belongings in there are filthy or dirty. You can put the Quran in there. So you can put it, let's say, on top of everything, for example. And that's just an example scenario, just in case, let's say, someone had a mushaf, a Quran in their luggage. Then that would be the judgment. If they weren't on wudu, they could carry it. I'll talk some details about transporting the Quran, inshallah, in the next class. طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله